not going to be on the tape.
They call this peace. Not how it seems to me. Sugar-coated disease.
You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we're discussing Middle Finger Response. The studio version is track number 6 on How to Clean Everything, and the track 16 on the How to Clean Everything 20th anniversary reissue. And this song also appears as track 6 of the A side of the bootleg live cassette, Yep. It also is the 5th track on a well-known bootleg called Curse of the MTV Punks, which was recorded in 1995 at Gilman Street.
Yeah, and I was also digging into this, Keith, because we're doing this How to Clean Everything episode, and this is one of the 2 records of How to Clean Everything in Today's Empires that we mentioned before that we were sort of behind on. And so if you count the 2013 reissue with bonus tracks, this is our 7th How to Clean Everything episode from that era that we've done. But this is only our 5th song if you are just counting the original LP version. So it kind of feels good that we're starting to catch up on some of these Empires and How to Clean Everything songs that we may have missed. So of the How to Clean Everything tracks that we've done so far, this is definitely my favorite. We've done Showdown and, Ska Sucks. And I think we did Head, Chest, or Foot. So this is my favorite one of the ones that we've done so far from this LP. And, I wonder if I've been subconsciously saving my favorite How to Clean Everything tracks for later. I wonder if I've been procrastinating this record because it's such a classic of the genre at this point. And I'm wondering if I was internally sensing the gravity of this record and feeling like a sense of foreboding and pressure about covering this totally smoking 1993 LP, and I remember feeling that sense of doom as well when we started talking about songs on Today's Empires and how that was the record that we both felt most nervous to discuss because it was our sort of almost gateway into the band.
Right.
But for so many people out there listening to the show, this is the record, you know what I mean? And I wonder who else out there could have hosted this show that would have been this was the record that got them into the band, and how this same kind of podcast would have been so different if it had been 2 different people who got into the band with this LP as opposed to you and me, who gravitate more towards the later stuff. You know what I mean?
Right. Providing a perspective that you and I both don't really bring to the table. And when we decided to cover this song a couple weeks ago, I realized that not only did I not have any physical or mental notes queued up, if it's a personal anecdote or interpretations I might have mentally filed away or even just jotted down in the memo on my phone, I couldn't even really play this track in my head like I can do with 90% or more of the band's discography. So that might make listeners groan a little bit if they go way back with Middle Finger Response or if they have a deeper connection with the song. But I more or less started this week with a blank slate in terms of my thoughts on the track, both musically and lyrically. And related to the songs that we've already discussed on the original How to Clean Everything, I would say that Head, Chest, or Foot is probably my favorite. But listening back again and again, I think this is probably maybe just behind it, and leaps and bounds beyond the others. And yeah. I agree about the pressure. There is that pressure to cover these early songs. That's definitely there for me. And I see it a little different from the burden of Today's Empires. I think it's an album that I can probably confidently say I love just as much as the average propaganda fan. I think that creates its own set of mental hurdles. But for How to Clean Everything, I'm just not super keen on the release, as I've not really kept secret. And I want to try to revisit as objectively as I can while understanding how much of a game changer the release was and how monumental the songs are for fans of the band. But I do feel less pressure discussing this than, eventually when we get to like Anti-Manifesto. But with all that said, Greg, it's crazy to think that we're approaching the 30-year anniversary of How to Clean Everything, which came out when I was 9, and I had 3 cassettes at the time. So if everyone is angry that I don't really love this record, I was listening to Michael Jackson's Bad, Billy Ray Cyrus's Some Gave All, and Criss Cross's Totally Crossed Out. So I'll allow that to kind of sink in. And so there's a 20-year retrospective review on punknews.org that provides a little bit of counterbalance to my connection or lack thereof with this LP. And a reviewer named Greg, no relation, I presume, writes, quote, propaganda. Troublemakers, rabble-rousers, vegans, feminists, pacifists, socialists, more liberal than anyone you've ever met. All that good stuff. We love them for it because it's like an extreme version of us, but we can't forget about how great their music is, even from the start. I've always preferred early propaganda for its classic fat wreck approach. And as one of the first bands on the label, they helped define that sound before abandoning it for more hardcore and metal horizons. While I think Less Talk, More Rock is their best, How to Clean Everything shows the band heading towards that perfect mix of politics and comedic with a technical and diverse punk backing. Clean shows the young Canucks at their most juvenile and crass in their political rants and the most silly in their other tunes. It makes perfect sense. Main vocalist Hannah was only 20 when he and the band wrote the songs. So that review helped me put things in perspective a bit, not just where the band was in their career, but also it's easy for me to forget like the world at the time and the sounds around them as they began to gain traction and how much of that they shaped themselves.
Yeah, I love that you went back and looked at some of the reviews and stuff from the time period. And I went back to that trusty Vice Rank Your Records article with Chris.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and he had this to say about the record. He said, "It is so dumb. It's just so dumb. we were teenagers when we wrote those songs. I challenge anybody who is 45 to go back and dig out a book of poetry from high school to show it to the world. No, sing it to the world when you've never sung before. I mean, I get why people like it. It's a goofy, skippy, cartoonish, laughable, Blink-182-ish kind of record, but it's just so... If I didn't sing on it or had known what to do in front of a mic before that, instead of putting on this weird, bizarre inflection in my voice, I didn't know what to do, which is mortifying. Yeah, it's a totally different vocal quality. It's a kid who hasn't sung in front of a mic before, approximating some band. I think I was trying to sound like the guy from Guilt Parade, mixed with maybe even Fat Mike. It's a disaster." So that's what Chris says about his own performance on the record. And, you know, something that I always love doing is understanding people's inspirations. And I was like, Guilt Parade? Who is Guilt Parade? So I was like, I haven't heard Guilt Parade. So I went and I found Guilt Parade. And I think that on their Discogs or their Wikipedia or something, it even says on Guilt Parade's entry, noted for being a notable influence of the band Propaganda. So I was like, oh, interesting. So I found Guilt Parade on the internet from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. And I was like, okay, I wonder how this sounds as an inspiration for this early era Propaganda. So I went and found a clip from Guilt Parade. So if anybody out there hasn't heard Guilt Parade before, this is what they sound like. So that was Guilt Parade, and it was kind of cool to discover a new influence on Chris's work from back then. And by the way, I chose that song very specifically out there for those listening. So yeah, that was Guilt Parade, and I thought that was pretty cool. But in that article, that Vice article about Rank Your Records, the interviewer goes on to say, how do you reconcile it being your least favorite album artistically and musically, but it also being the entry point for your band for a significant number of fans? I mean, I'm not sure the shows would be as full if not for that record. How do you come to peace with those things? And Chris says, I guess I am at peace. I don't want to hear the record, but I see the practical value it has for our band still to this day. And I don't really regret even the things we were saying. We were taking some stances that I don't think teenagers should necessarily attempt to take at that point in their lives on the record that is going to be your biggest selling record of all time. But we didn't get everything wrong. So I'm happy about that. There are some things that are wrong, but not everything. So thinking about that, I think back on, some of our discussions about this record, you know what I mean? And some of the things that I've critiqued, especially on the approach to like this might be satire or whatever. And so I appreciate Chris saying that, not everything on there is great now, but I still stand by most of it. And I'm glad that he feels that way, because I can't imagine how hard it would be if like your biggest selling record of all time is like totally the antithesis of everything you go on to become for the rest of your life. So I'm glad that he feels good about it, And then Chris goes on to say, I guess I'm glad people enjoy it. We've come to this point with the band now where people who only like that stuff, they don't really come to our shows anymore. We filtered them out over the past 10 or 14 years. We've actually reached a point now that when we play old stuff in some places, that's when the crowd seems kind of unfamiliar with what's happening. We've reached a latter half kind of crowd that are more interested in the past 3 records, or especially the past 2. But then, where were we? Maybe it was Florida. We were totally taken aback. It was a total How to Clean Everything crowd, and we hadn't seen that in such a long time. All you can do is deal with it in good humor and play a couple tracks from the record, and we still do. We still play songs just for fun. So I was curious about the best-selling aspect of this record. You know what I mean? Because this record came out in a time when people still bought albums, like a lot. And so I went to Fat Wreck's website, and sure enough, How to Clean Everything is listed as number 9 on the top 20 best-selling records by the label.
Oh, wow.
In their online store. And it's not like numbered, but like I counted the order that it appears in. And it appears as number 9 on the top 20 best-selling all-time records. And most of the records that are before it are No Effects or Me First and the Gimme Gimmes records, which makes a lot of sense. But this is, I bet this record has sold a lot. And I spent an embarrassingly large amount of time trying to find out how many records this actually sold without asking the band themselves, because I try not to bother them with banal minutia.
Yeah.
But like, I couldn't find out how many albums this sold, but it's listed as way, way up there on the Fat Records website.
So the reviewer from Punk News looks back on this record with nostalgia and admiration. Like many of the fans of the band also do, I'm sure. And Chris looks back, as you read here, and winces a bit.
Yeah.
So let's hear what some other people think about the song we're here to discuss, Middle Finger Response. Greg, who did you connect with for this episode?
So we have 2 guests, but I'm going to space them out throughout the episode for a couple of particular reasons. We'll get to our second guest during the lyrics discussion portion of this episode. So something that's really funny about these guests is I had technical problems with both of these interviews, and I lost the recording of the first version of both interviews. So I have 2 guests on this episode, and I did 4 interviews to get 2 interviews. So it was, comedic. It was almost like trying to record Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes to make this record, where literally just everything just kept going wrong. So our first guest is Andy Treister. Andy is a neurologist, musician, and a diehard Propaganda fan who lives in Portland, Oregon. He previously played guitar in the Southern California band Strike 12, which has opened for Propaganda. Andy reached out to me on Instagram saying that he wanted to do a jazz cover of Middle Finger Response. And I was like, say what now? And immediately I agreed that he should do that. So he sent me the jazz cover of the song, and I was so impressed that I had to have him on the show to talk about how he adapted the original version into being a jazz cover that he arranged and performed 100% by himself on all instruments, recorded in his basement. And so we recorded the first time, and then the Zoom file downloaded while I was out of the room, and I never hit the save button, and then my computer restarted overnight. And that's how I lost Andy's first interview. So he graciously agreed to re-record, and we got it done. but his jazz cover is so awesome. And when we break down the musical composition of his track, I think that everybody will be really interested. And Andy has also made a playthrough video, which I will post on our Instagram and Twitter at PropagandyPod. Andy's Instagram, where you can find all of his work, is at Andy in the Basement on Instagram. So let's get to our chat with Dr. Andy Treister, talking about his jazz cover adaptation of Middle Finger Response. But before we get to the interview, let's hear the tune, and then we'll be back in a little bit. Andy Treister, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Andy, this is kind of an interesting thing because you and I just did this 5 days ago. And I posted on social media the other day that, I went and recorded an interview and then forgot to hit save when the audio downloaded. And then my computer restarted overnight. And then I searched for the next 10, 12 hours for any shred of evidence that the file you and I had recorded existed anywhere in the internet or on this computer that I am now sitting at. And it was totally gone. So I cannot be more filled with gratitude to you right now for rescheduling again to have literally the same conversation that we had 5 days ago. So you are a real Unscripted Moments pro and a pal, and I am so grateful to you right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not every day that I get to spend 40 minutes talking about why Propaganda is my favorite band. So this is it's kind of a treat to do it again.
Oh, Lordy. Okay, well, Andy, can you just spend a moment and introduce yourself to the audience however you see fit? Because I know that people will be very curious about you because of the fantastic jazz rendition of Middle Finger Response that preceded this interview. So go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, so my name's Andy Treister. I am a neurologist in Portland, Oregon. I've been living here for about 3 years. And before that, I was in Southern California where I played in a punk band called Strike 12. And we played together for about 10 years or so. So we had some good shows in there, including one with Propaganda.
We'll talk about that.
Sorry.
Either way, we don't discriminate here between the pronunciations. Keith and I just made a deal that we were just going to let it fly from day one and just, see however it fits. Andy, what is your sort of instrumentation history? How did you get into playing music, finding instruments, getting those skills kind of honed? Because you've got a pretty wide variety of musical chops.
Yeah, me and my brother both started playing guitar and bass. He got a guitar when he was probably 12 or so, and then I had to get a bass when I was, a couple years younger than him. And then we took lessons all throughout our, high school years until we went off to college, so I kind of spread from bass to guitar, and we had a drum set since we were little kids too, so we learned how to bang around on that. Those are kind of the instruments that I'm most comfortable on, but in a pinch, I'll throw in some piano or ukulele or whatever is required.
Fabulous. And, I know you mentioned your band, Strike 12, right? Can that music be found on streaming services or physical records or anywhere for anybody out there to check out if they wanted to?
Yeah, so we have a Spotify, Apple accounts. We have a Bandcamp page where you can find all the albums. They're coming up with a new album right now. They've written and I think mostly recorded the whole thing. I had a little bit of input here and there, but now that I'm 1,000 miles away, I didn't do a whole lot other than I've heard it and it sounds pretty cool.
How does jazz come into your musical performing repertoire over the course of time? Because the cover that you submitted for Middle Finger Response is definitely not punk rock, definitely not a ripper. How did you get into jazz and playing music like this?
I had a guitar teacher when I was a kid who would try to teach me jazz, and I didn't really grasp it, but I was learning some licks and learning some theory. And then throughout college, I got a little bit more interested in it, and I always kind of knew I was supposed to go back and learn jazz the right way. And just put it off until I had time. And then when I was in med school towards the end, when I knew I was going to have 6 months of a pretty easy schedule. So I went back and started taking lessons on Skype from a guy named Jeff Thomas, who actually taught us when we were little kids, transcribing Green Day and Offspring songs. I started taking lessons with him, delving more specifically into jazz. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years until my son was born. And just needed to, not spend extra money and not waste my time too much on projects like that. But in the meantime, I've, kept up on my studying, and I've played around with a few people since moving to Portland. And it's a lot of fun. It's a good way to learn how to think outside the box.
Off the top of my head, I think that you're our third physician on the show. I think that, so we had Conrad Sichler from Toothpick Hercules, who's in the Leg Hold Trap episode. We had Josh Siegel, who was on our Resisting Tyrannical Government, but then also came back way later to do an acoustic cover for our Refusing to Be a Man episode. And now you. So off the top of my head, I think that you're our third physician, which is actually a really exciting little statistic for me. Hooray for that. Trio of doctors. Love it. Andy, how did you find and get into the music of Propaganda originally?
Well, stop me if you've heard this one before,
Sure.
but Fat Wreck had these comps back
Oh
in
my
the
God.
90s. So yeah, I'm not unique in that sense. We were getting into the 90s skate punk towards the end of the 90s. When we were in junior high school, and me and my brother, when I say we, and we had like the Punkorama comps from Epitaph, and then there were the Fat Wreck comps, and like I was very drawn to the Propaganda songs on them. So I had How to Clean Everything and Let's Talk, and I think I had Quantity at the same time. I think I got all three of those for Christmas one year, and that was right around the time or right before Today's Empires came back. So I got Today's Empires. I was like 13 and used to Blink-182 and Offspring and stuff, so
Yeah.
it didn't really jive with me at first.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember being probably a freshman in high school when I just like kind of started to understand that album, and I was like, oh, this is just way deeper. And it was kind of my gateway out of punk rock.
Where did you go next?
After I kept listening to the bands that I was listening to, which was the Vandals, NoFX, Guttermouth, bands like that. I started playing with a like parody 80s metal band in the end of high school. So I was getting really into 80s and thrash metal and power metal, and that was a quick jump over to Dream Theater and Rush, and so by the mid 2000s, 2010s, I was listening mostly to prog rock, and then starting to listen to a lot more jazz too.
I love it. So something that we are super into here on this podcast, which is something that I have been really into from day one, is when folks do covers of the songs, even if it's a pre-existing cover. Like Jen Fiorentino's has had a couple of covers on the show, but those were always recorded long before they ever appeared in our show. But we love it when we're able to put in a cover of the song, because we just feel like it adds like another layer of depth to the podcast, something that we're able to do. And you came up with this incredibly original and well thought out and well developed cover of Middle Finger Response from How to Clean Everything, which sort of like came at me out of left field, like really by surprise in a lot of ways. And I've listened to it a bunch of times, and I actually have watched your playthrough video as well that you made for the podcast. And it's really fantastic listening to the song and then listening to your version and seeing like if I can like decipher little symbolic moments within your performance and what they're supposed to represent within the song itself. And I love the way that you did this. And so I'm wondering what it is about Middle Finger Response that made you pursue this composition to adapt into a jazz style. Why Middle Finger Response?
Yeah, I had this idea like years ago to do like a whole album of Propaganda jazz covers.
You should.
I was thinking of calling it "Stick the Jazz Up Your Fucking Ass" or something along those lines.
Amazing.
So I had tossed around a lot of arrangements, and honestly, the reason that I recorded this one at the time, which I'll get to some of it, but mainly it was because you had already done a lot of the good ones that I had in mind. I'm not going to say which ones in case someone wants to steal my idea, but
yeah.
So the thing about Middle Finger Response that sticks out is a couple of things that lend itself well to jazz. One is the structure. Like there's riffs in it, there's chords that repeat, but for the most part, the melody is just so linear. Like it's just one long thought, and it goes through a series of chord progressions, and then the whole thing repeats. And in a lot of ways, that's how jazz standards are structured. It's usually like 32 bars or 16 bars of one long thought, and then the whole thing repeats. And after the main melody, each instrumentalist gets to improvise over it one time or so. The other part about middle finger response is there's all these inherent key changes that make it super fun. So like I have the chart sitting right next to me on my desk. And as I'm going through it, it's like the first 4 bars are in A, and then the next 4 bars are in G major. And then there's like this B section, which is in C. And then the end of the song kind of goes between C major and F major, at least in my reharmonization of it. But I think it fits the melody pretty well. There's that if you want to see it.
Lovely. I'll post a photo of that later.
And so yeah, it's cool. There's even just listening to the melody, you can kind of feel the way that the key changes happen. Like so there's the part where it's like da 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 for those who seek all your novel themes. Like you can feel the melody kind of take a step down, which is literally what it does there. And so that kind of caught my ear as a place to really kind of exploit the key change and make it interesting. Because as like an improviser, those are the things that you're looking for, are these fun little key changes that you can kind of bury and make melodic, and kind of hide from the listener, but still make it sound extra interesting.
Wonderful. I'm really curious about your adaptation of the tune. Upon first listening, I would have thought that there was actually some piano in there, but I think I actually got that wrong. I think you just have a lead and like a backing sort of supporting guitar part, and then a bass and drums. I want to know about the creation, your performance, if you had to program any of the performances or anything like that. Tell me all about like the actual process of making this and what you had to do.
Yeah, I kind of set out from the beginning to videotape it. And since I haven't edited a video in like 10 years, I wanted to make it as easy on myself as possible. So almost all of it is single takes, other than I think I had to splice the drums into 2 takes. But there's pretty minimal overdubs. The lead guitar, outside of the melody, is all improvised. So I just had to get a take where I nailed it. And I think I did okay on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, otherwise I did all of them in a couple of takes, all in a single run for the most part. Maybe on one of my future ones, I'll try to throw on piano, but that would have been a lot of learning. I'm still not that comfortable around a keyboard. But other than that, yeah. So there's nothing's pre-programmed. It's just set up mics and put on a click track and do one at a time. And then I did all the mixing myself, which you can probably tell because it sounds like it was recorded in a basement and mixed by somebody who doesn't have any real training.
How did you just use that chart that you wrote out to support yourself as you were performing? Because whenever you were playing, I kind of saw you glancing at something on the other side, like off screen. And I'm wondering like how you were supporting yourself through your performance, because you mentioned improvisation, and that is just so far beyond what I'm capable of ever understanding about, keys and musical performance or anything like that. So how did you support yourself to get through this?
Yeah, so I just had, I wrote out a chart, which I'm happy to take a picture of and post it on my Instagram or something if anybody's interested.
Yeah, say your Instagram real quick.
It's Andy in the Basement.
Wonderful.
So there's a bunch of places in the video where you can see me looking up and looking kind of dumbfounded, and that's just because I'm trying to read this chart while I'm playing along. This is the nice thing about jazz is you don't really have to memorize much because you can have the chart right in front of you.
Yeah.
I also learned that I make a really funny face when I'm playing bass that I don't do with other instruments.
Which one of these instruments was the greatest struggle for you on this particular tune?
I would say probably the bass, which is interesting because I do a lot of like when I'm playing jazz guitar with other players, if there's no bass player, I'll do like a walking bass line, but like playing a bass line on a bass without the chords without also playing chords along with it seems like it should be easier, but for me it was just kind of a different mindset, and so I had to do a couple more practice runs on that. The drums were fairly simple. I just kind of play the same little swing beat the whole time. So that wasn't too bad.
I know that you have a little musical freak out within the song. Would you like to talk about that and what that represents to the listeners out there who just heard it and kind of like understand what's going on there?
Yeah, so there towards the end there's like a little section where everybody solos, and it's it matches up to the song in the place where he does the flag waving area and
Yeah.
motherfucking et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of my own little rant on the instruments.
I love it. I love it. I'm wondering if you had any takes on the lyrics of this particular song. This is a very wordy song compared to more recent propaganda. There's a ton of words, and I always have the lyrics in front of me when Keith and I are recording, and I just notice how many words this one has compared to so many other songs. And I'm wondering if you have an interpretation of what is happening in this song.
Yeah, it's looking at this song, I think the subject matter is very similar to like Head Chesterfoot or Anti-Manifesto, where it's kind of this broad fuck you to suburbia or the status quo or consumerism maybe. I'm sure you and Keith will have a lot more to say about those subjects, but that's one of the things that I think they really grew on between How to Clean Everything and Let's Talk More Rock, and then certainly between Let's Talk More Rock and Today's Empires, is how specific they got over time. Like How to Clean Everything is a lot of really general themes, and then you get a little bit more specific in Less Talk, and then by the time you get to Today's Empires, it's like each is a story out of a history book, and it's just,
Right.
it's so much more captivating, I think. That being said, like even the lyrics in these songs that he wrote when he was in his early 20s or teens, like there's so much good imagery. Like a teenager couldn't write this. It's crazy.
It's really, really amazing. I'm looking at them right now, and it's just so many amazing little one-liners throughout this entire thing. It blows my mind. And I loved the 3 billion humans line, and hearing Conrad Sichler talk about that on the Leg Hold Trap episode, because when he was recording the demo, he was like trying very, very patiently to not correct Chris on the amount of people that were on the planet in 1992, in 1993. And then he also was very offended by how many people Chris was saying fuck you to. And then on the demo, it's like, except for Conrad Sichler. I loved it. And I can't believe we tracked down Conrad. And it's so funny that he's the one who recorded the demo of this. And I'm so glad we're finally getting to this episode as well, because Conrad told that story and it absolutely cracked me up. But Andy, earlier you mentioned your band, and you mentioned when you introduced yourself that your band has actually played with Propaganda, and I'm wondering if you have any stories about those times that you would like to tell the audience as well, because I don't know how many listeners out there have bands that have actually opened up for Propaganda, and you have. So tell that story.
Yeah. So the last time we talked, I was just trying to recollect through it and things that I had jotted down in the previous days. But after we talked, I realized that I had written down a whole account of the night in a notebook right after the show.
Yeah.
And so I pulled this out, and I'll just read it to you, because it's.
Is it dated?
It's dated 5/30/2009. I didn't put the year, but I think it was 2009.
Holy smokes. I'm ready for this.
Okay. So tonight was the night, underline. We opened up for Propaganda, and no disasters struck. I arrived at 5, and they were sound checking. I stood at the side of the stage as they played through Without Love and the ending of Today's Empires. As Chris came out, I introduced myself to him as a super fan, and he was very down to earth and friendly. We set up our shit and sound checked, but at that point, Propaganda had headed back to their hotel. They had a green room set up for us on the second story that had a cooler, which we soon filled with beer. While in the green room, I ran into the Beaver, and he asked me where the quote-unquote washroom was. I helped him look for it, and later discovered that it was the one door that was locked, in parentheses, in which Propaganda's sound man was allegedly masturbating, they said later on stage. I'm going to try to remember the whole set in as close to possible order, or as close as possible to correct order. There's something weird with my grammar here. I was too excited. So
it's
they
fine.
Opened with supporting cast, then Tertium Non Datur, Diugen Marschiert, Banger's Embrace, Bringer of Greater Things with Chris on vocals. And we thought Nation States was a bad idea. Haile Selassie, Rio de San Atlanta, Let's Talk More Rock. Yeah.
Nice.
Without Love, Speculative Fiction, Back to the Motor League, Humane Meat, Mata Kamoris Ukun Rasik An. Today's Empires, Anti-Manifesto, Fuck the Border with some kids singing, Dear Coach's Corner, and then ended with Purina Hall of Fame. Like, can you pick a better set list than that?
I cannot.
Oh my God. All right.
I don't think I can. That's legitimately a good set.
It's like, it's a greatest hits album right there. And it doesn't even have Victory Lap on or Failed States. This was before Failed States.
Before Failed States, yeah.
So, okay, there's more. So afterward, we went up to their room and asked to take a picture, and they all got up from an interview to pose with us. Then George stayed and talked to us for a while about Alabama and Palestine. I'm not sure what was going on in Alabama at the time, but
We might have to Google that.
might have to Google it. Tonight, I experienced something far beyond what most experience. There were a few other notable experiences. First of all, we got to use Propagandi's cabs, which made everything way easier on us. Secondly, while they were sound checking and Chad and I were watching, Chad is my friend, Jord farted into the mic. Just before they played, as I came up the stairs, I could see them playing supporting casts on their unplugged guitars and with Jord drumming on his knees. I thought that was so cool. I remember this now. They were like actually practicing in their green room before playing a show, which was so novel to me.
Nice.
That was usually our drinking time. So that was my 21-year-old account of playing with Propaganda.
Oh my God. Andy, I'm so glad that you have that. I mean, it's an artifact for a night, for a moment in time. You know what I mean? That's very special to you. And I know for a fact that when you dig that thing out again someday, when you're like 79 years old, you're going to be like, oh my God. And you're going to be like in a rocking chair, like listening to Propaganda, like, oh my God, remember when this happened? And it's just going to be such an amazing little thing that you can have forever. So I'm really glad that you still have that and for sharing it on the show, because you didn't have to do that. And I'm just delighted that you did. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
Andy, before I let you go here tonight from take 2 of our attempt at recording an interview, which you cannot even imagine how relieved I was. I just had a really good feeling that you were not going to be furious at me and that it was going to be okay, because a lot of these interviews, there's no second try. Do you know what I mean? Like if you record something like this and somebody gives you their time, you get one go. So the fact that you were willing to do this with me a second time, I just got to say is like a huge props to you. So thank you so much for doing that one more time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, you are always welcome to call me up and geek out about Propaganda, because I don't get to do it very often.
Well, I love it. Okay, so Andy, before I let you go, what does this band mean to you? Talk to me about the course of your life and where they stand in your, in the grand scheme of your life as something that matters to you.
Yeah. When we played with them and I got to talk to Jord, I remember telling him, I said, like, to say that you guys are my favorite band is an understatement, because it's like there's Propaganda and then there's all the rest of music. Like what they have done, not just for me, but for everyone, all their listeners and all the influences they've had on people, like from a musical standpoint, from a lyrical standpoint, from a, social activism standpoint, like, I'm sure a lot of your listeners would probably agree that our social view, our way of life, the impact we have on the world and to other people around us is changed dramatically just by kind of being hypnotized by how good their music is. That very well may be part of it. And so, I don't know what kind of music I'd listen to if it wasn't for them. I don't know what kind of person I'd be if I'd be an ass or more of an ass than I am. But yeah, I mean, I think I would be a much different person.
But you're not the only one who feels that way. Keith and I feel that way too. And we talked a lot about that on the Only Good Fascist is a Very Dead Fascist episode a long time ago, but I went into great detail about how it really could have gone either way for me. And, but Chris recently did a Fuck the Scene demo tape bonus episode on his Patreon where he talked about how Jord did that for him. Yeah. And that was one of the most moving stories, hearing Chris talk about the role that Jord played in his life in, transforming him from a child essentially coming from a conservative military family into being what he, eventually became. And to hear about the way that the people in the band challenged each other and they went on that journey together and they all grew together while making this great art that we have all come to appreciate over the years. I mean, I love that they had that experience together and that we got to have that experience as listeners and have our lives changed because Chris and Jord had those experiences together. I mean, it's really powerful if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about them as musicians, like it's so like serendipitous that Chris and Jord met each other and they met Todd. I mean, specifically, obviously the other members, Sulin and Beeve and John K. Sampson, like are all very important, but for framing the core of their sound and the innovation that they achieve, like for those three working together is so like it couldn't happen by chance.
Amazing. Well, Andy Treister, I am super pumped about your jazz cover of Middle Finger Response. I am super pumped about your playthrough video that you made as well. So if anybody out there is listening, Andy's going to have the links to a playthrough video on Andy in the Basement on Instagram. And we'll also, tweet it out in our Twitter and put it in our Instagram stories as well. So you can find those on social media around the time of the release of this episode. And Andy, thank you so much for putting in that work to make this really unique cover. You made something that didn't exist in the world before, and now it exists. And I'm grateful to you for coming on to talk me through it.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. And I want to take 1 second to acknowledge the work that you and Keith put into this show. And like, I've been listening pretty much from the beginning, and just to get to relive all of my favorite songs over and over again and do these deep dives, it's really pushed me over the last year and a half or so to really take the Propaganda way of life more to heart and be a better person. So thank you again for doing what you guys do. I
Cheers,
know it
Andy.
can't be easy.
Cheers. So appreciative, man. Oh man. Okay, so thank you, Andy Treister. That was so cool. I love that cover that he did. I love the playthrough video. I love talking to Andy about it. He even sent me a picture of his charting where he wrote out the song that he could like refer back to as he was playing it. So I will put an image of a screenshot of Andy's playthrough chart as well up on our social media in connection with the post for this particular episode. So thank you so much to Andy for going so above and beyond and everything that you did to make this episode so cool. Very appreciated. So Keith, you think we should get into the music a little bit here on this episode?
Sure, Greg. And I'll preface by saying I don't have a whole lot to say musically about this song. I listened to 3 versions of this in the last week or so, mostly. The remastered How to Clean Everything cut, a live performance from San Diego at 13th and Broadway from that show that's all over YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And then a more recent live version at the Red River Rampage show. I think the newest live performance for me and my taste was the most palatable. Just overall, I think the song doesn't really deliver what I associate with the band, but also what I find to be appealing either when I first started to scratch the surface with punk or what even gets me circling back and revisiting older things or looking for newer bands. The guitars are fast. It has like lightning quick right hand action and palm muting. There are these ringing melodies that sync up with the vocals. I think a lot of the vocals seem to carry most of the melody though. I think it's okay musically, but for the most, I just don't find much to be interesting. Maybe outside of the outro, which seems to be a pretty big risk or a little bit of an outlier in terms of what the rest of this album was bringing in, in the early 1990s.
Yeah, and
for the time and place in which this song came out, I mean, obviously it's fantastic, but like knowing what the band has gone on to do, I find this to be among the least interesting musical compositions for this band. And I don't say that to rip on it. Like, I just find it to be like what my high school band was doing, you know. I watched a ton of guitar playthroughs of this one, and it's fine. Like, I like the song. And my first thought when trying to find something about the guitar to talk about is that I'm glad the band didn't keep doing music like this. I would still like this band to this day, but if all of their records stayed in this style for 7 LPs, I wouldn't have, you know, I would probably never put them on anymore. I don't really know. So, you know, that's kind of my thought on this. But I was watching that 2012 performance at the Red River Rampage show as well, and I noticed that Chris and Beeve had this song played with a capo on the first fret on guitar in 2012. So that was something that I noticed specifically about the performance. The bass on the song, like, it doesn't really stand out to me on the studio recording.
Yeah, I agree.
And so it's kind of hard to even tell how I feel about the bass, but the easiest way to hear the bass is actually if you watch the 1994 outdoor performance in San Diego that you mentioned, and the bass is super clear on that because the recording is terrible and the bass is really, really forward in that recording. So here's what the bass line sounds like. I'll play a little clip of that particular performance right here just so you can hear what the bass is really doing. Okay, so that's kind of what the bass line is doing, and it's good. You know, it's like it's good stuff. And so I don't really have a whole heck of a lot to say about this song in general musically, but I do have some observations on the live performances that you mentioned. I watched performances of this song from 94, 95, and 2012. Mm-hmm. And the ones back in the 90s, they did this thing where they'd stop playing the music under the nobody cares about the state of affairs. You can turn blue in the face, but you cannot erase, oblivious to the obvious and making perfect sense, but I'm not getting through. So in the 90s versions, the band like does like this like stop and start thing on the music while Chris does that rapid fire vocal line. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And Chris would just sing that stream of consciousness without the music mostly. And in the 2012 version, I noticed that they kept playing all the way through, like on the record, without those stops and starts. And I found that to be really interesting because to me, it shows the growth and the skill level of the band as a live unit where maybe they couldn't pull off that stream of rapid fire vocals. Maybe Chris couldn't play it right and sing on that. So they adapted it in the 90s to make sure that Chris could get those vocals out without having to focus on guitar also. But in 2012, man, he just lays it all out and they keep playing just like on the record. So I think that the more recent performances of this song show that the band is just such a better live unit than they were when this record came out, because like they play it on the record in the more recent versions, but they had to change it in the 90s versions, which I found to be super interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that also seems to maybe reflect somewhat of their goals when they were playing live, you know, to make those lyrics up front and audible, saying like we I can't get through to you. To where the band was far more forward in their messaging at the time and have kind of taken a backseat with that when it comes to their live shows. But that's a super interesting difference that you don't really see at a live show today or live recordings.
Yeah, so I wanted to play a couple of the a sample of that. So here's the 90s version with the paused music under under that rapid stream vocal line. So here's that. Check that out and see how they did it in the 90s.
Nobody cares for the state of affairs. It's a burning face, but you can't erase. Living yes to the obvious, making perfect sense, but I'm not getting through. So will do, but don't expect to find you the blood to be red. Pistol in my hand.
Okay, and here is the 2012 version with when Beav was in the band. So here's that one. Yeah, and I just love that. I love those little differences there. So anyway, so that's my thoughts on the music. It's fine. It's a good song, but as far as like the canon of this band goes, this is like way down there for me as far as like interesting musical performance. Because it just is what it is. It's a early 90s punk ripper, and that's pretty much what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't fire the synapses like some of their later records do for me.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't really, it's not Night Letters. Let's just say that.
Right.
So let's get into the lyrics. What do you think?
Cool.
Okay, cool. So we've got this opening line here. Bowl of cherries in Waskasoo Creek, a sylvan way of life for those who seek none beyond a parkland mall, this landscape oasis now feigns city hall. And they call this peace. Not how it seems to me. Sugar-coated disease, buckle at the knees. Tell me what you think about this. These opening lyrics here, Keith.
The first line feels like an earlier version of some of the ideas that are later fleshed out on Devil's Creek. The joy one finds in solitude of nature, the quiet, except for maybe the rustling of tree branches, the steady flow of water, the constant buzz of insects, and the chirps and tweets from birds. Like life can feel like a bowl of cherries when you leave the noise of society behind. Just like how I think light pollution cuts us off from the nighttime wonders of stargazing if you live anywhere near a city. To me, like the inescapable hum of traffic deadens the sounds of the natural world. And though this might make me sound more like a naturalist than I really am, there is a calming, meditative quality to the natural world. And I think I realized that, especially the last year and a half, I'm kind of just not having the opportunities to be out and about that in ways that I was previously. So, for anyone at home, if you're nodding along to these thoughts or comments, and if you aren't opposed to more extreme versions of music, I highly recommend the band Panopticon. I've talked about them previously, especially the new album, And Again Into the Light. The aesthetic is, less dire activism, like, Earth Crisis, but more of like a personal connection to nature and what happens to the soul as that like nature is eroded away. So going back to the first lines, the Devil's Creek style imagery, I think is interesting because it's juxtaposed with this municipal architecture and power, which aims mostly just to exploit natural resources. And I just started reading Kim Stanley Robinson's Red Mars this past week.
Awesome. Nice.
And there's a great passage about the political treaties put into place to preserve and protect Antarctica and how they had been a success, but also at the same time revealed how the rest of the world had essentially been a failure, that the entire planet should be protected from governmental and corporate exploitation, not just Antarctica. And this mental imagery conjured up by the first lines, I think closely describes where I live. Honestly, like there's a bird sanctuary next to an interstate and a BW3s. The Indiana Dunes National and State Parks are bordered by oil refineries and steel mills.
Oh man.
There's a protected prairie, a walking distance from my apartment that is completely eclipsed by massive oil tanks. So there are these nuggets of nature, like an oasis, like the song mentions, that is not at all proportionate to the developed madness that makes up pretty much every other square mile of where I live.
Sheesh.
So the natural surroundings, the dunes, Black Oak Savanna, prairies, things that are skirted by woodlands, all quote unquote developed into strip malls, restaurants, and cookie cutter housing developments. It kind of reminds me of the Simon Pegg movie, The World's End, where they go to the bars and every bar they visit has gotten the Starbucks treatment.
Nice.
They have the identical aesthetic. They have chalkboards with like, you know, the menus, there's TVs. Like the town has erased its diversity to appeal to a common denominator. And before we did that to coffee shops and restaurants and houses and bars and stores and everything else that we've, changed and homogenized, we Starbucksed our natural surroundings, and it feels harder and harder to seek those things out and find those connections where there aren't the traces of human development or overdevelopment.
You know, that makes a ton of sense to me as well, because I've been to your town now because
Right.
I came down
Yeah.
there in April, and that's one of the starkest images. And everything you just said resonates entirely with my
Yeah.
memory of driving into your town
Mhm.
from the 190 that runs across the northern United States.
Mhm.
And I'm just like having all these flashbacks of being in my car back in April now, driving to meet you. And it's really amazing. But like, I love how the idyllic scenes of this opening line are immediately ripped apart. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
It's like this layer of beauty on top of a mountain of heaping crap.
Right.
And like, I got to tell you, like, the longer I'm alive, the more episodes of Exterminate All the Brutes I watch by Raoul Peck. And the more I watch First Nations graves discovered in Canada, and the more I watch the US embarrass itself all over the world stage, and the more I watch our electrical grids fail in hurricanes and our streets flood due to climate change catastrophe, you know, the recent extreme escalation of the war on women with the imposed bounty system in Texas, where private citizens can legitimately report any person who is believed to have been a part of a woman receiving an abortion, from like the Uber driver to the office staff to the nurse. And the more I watch our pandemic numbers skyrocket, the rot within really stands out more and more amidst the backdrop of our shiny buildings and our smooth highways and our unlimited data plans and our stocked grocery store shelves. The shininess is less and less impressive to me as I watch the people of our society rip each other apart. And like, this opening scene of this like idyllicness brings up another thought for me. Like, another thing that springs to mind is the intensely segregated nature of our cities in the US and Canada.
Yeah.
Like, I live in Buffalo, and the Buffalo East Side is nearly all African American. St. Louis has the north-south divide at Delmar Boulevard, which is where I grew up. And looking at the racial dot map from the University of Virginia is really interesting here, because the idyllic scenes that Chris is describing at the start of the song, to me, is like the white Canadian idyllic or the white American idyllic. And to me, so much of the white American and Canadian experience has been to remove those unlike themselves to other parts of town, like deny non-white people housing loans, steer them to certain parts of town with real estate purchases, and so much else. And yeah, like, I have beautiful memories, like Chris describes in the opening lines of the song, of my little place within that segregated and cultivated quote unquote peace that my family provided for me as a little boy. And I had no idea I was part of a much greater system of rot, where certain populations of people are set up to thrive and other people are set up to not thrive. And it just makes me so sad that so much of the idyllic memories that I have feel tainted in such gross and disappointing ways. And then I think about, oh my gosh, am I doing that to my own kid? And holy smokes, that hurts a heck of a lot. But anyway, so Keith, now, the opening line of this song says Waskesiu Creek, Sylvan, Parkland Mall. Does this, like, what were you thinking when you thought of like these like specific names? Like, did you get curious about these places?
Yeah, I didn't look them up. I just figured I saw it more as something specific from Chris's childhood, that in ways just like you described, whether that's now in Buffalo for you or St. Louis growing up, that like the names didn't really matter as much, because we can all think of what our versions of that creek or that mall or that community would be.
Yeah.
So I was like more applying it to my own upbringing and my own landscape than searching out details about those specific places.
Well, you are in luck, my friend. So these locations are all real, and they are all in the greater Red Deer, Alberta area. And a listener of the podcast named Lyndon Nygaard reached out to me a few weeks ago and said, hey, so I was like listening to How to Clean Everything, and all the locations, just as like I made this realization that Middle Finger Response opening lyrics are about Red Deer. So I was like, hey, Lyndon, this is excellent. Get on the phone with me and we'll talk about these locations. So I have a full interview about just this section of lyrics to break down the first 3 sentences in this song. And the locations described here by Lyndon. He submitted photographs as well, which we will also publish on Instagram and Twitter for each of the locations. So we literally have photos from Sylvan Lake, Waskesiu Creek, City Hall, and Parkland Mall that Lyndon took. And so Lyndon was kind enough to travel on a field trip all over Red Deer, snapping
How
pics.
cool.
I know. And so like the song is described in 93, and Lyndon drove around here in the summer of 2021, snapping pics of all these places. And he jumped on the phone with me for about 20 minutes to talk about these spots in Red Deer, Alberta. So I have a conversation with Lyndon Nygaard, and we're going to talk all about Red Deer. So Keith and I will be back in about 20 minutes. So enjoy this chat with Lyndon.
Nobody cares about the state of affairs. You turn blue in the face, but you can't erase oblivious to the obvious. I'm making perfect sense, but I'm not getting through.
Lyndon Nygaard, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Thanks, Greg. Glad to be here.
Well, Lyndon, this is really funny, and I just like to joke about these things when they happen, about having the audio file of our recording lost. And, hopefully I'm not setting myself for a failure of download after we get off the phone here tonight. But what's really funny about the Middle Finger Response episode is that I had to redo both interviews for the episode. So you and Andy have both been put through the ringer twice on this. And I'm just grateful to you for coming back tonight and hanging out again.
Yeah, not a problem, man. Like I said, I anytime I can talk about the band, I'm more than happy to.
Love it. Well, Lyndon, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit for the audience, just so they kind of know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name's Lyndon Nygaard, 44 years old, born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Spent my first 24 years for the most part there. And actually, I was thinking about it this morning. In 1 week, it'll be 20 years to the day that I moved to Red Deer.
Fabulous.
So we're coming up on the anniversary.
Awesome.
So I've been here just about 20 years now, and been a big propaganda fan since 93. Tried to follow along pretty much with every album release. Discovered you guys about just over a year and a half ago, I think. Man, love the podcast, love the band. So glad to be here.
Fabulous. Well, were you a fan of propaganda while you were living in Winnipeg? Were they kind of like your favorite local band when you were living there?
Absolutely. I got turned on to them by a friend of mine in art class in 1993. Late 93. A friend of mine named Sarah Day asked me, do you listen to punk rock music? And I said, no, not really. A little bit of Ramones, a little DOA, maybe some SNFU. She said, you got to check out this band Propaganda. And the name right off the bat, it struck a chord in me. I thought, man, that's hilarious. And she had a really bad taped copy of Martial Law with a cherry on top.
Nice.
And from that day forward, they were absolutely my favorite Canadian band, if not all around worldwide.
When did you see the band live first? Is there any like early days shows that really stand out to you about going to see them?
Yeah, actually, the last time we talked, I had actually forgot that the first time I saw them was at the Pyramid Cabaret. And it wasn't called the Pyramid back then. I can't remember what it was called. But that was actually the first time I saw them, because it was still wintertime And I remember when we talked, Core Fest is actually in the summertime. So that was the second time I saw them was Core Fest. Shortly after, I got very lucky in being able to see them quite a few times live in Winnipeg while I lived there. And I've actually caught them a few times out here as well. So I've been very, very fortunate to see them live in many respects.
Nice. Do they come to Red Deer, or do you drive to Edmonton or Calgary to see them?
I have never seen them in Red Deer since I've been here. I've never seen an advertisement for a show here. Both times I've seen them has been in Starlight in Edmonton. It's a great venue for live shows. I've seen numerous shows there, but Propaganda both times have been absolutely fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, Lyndon, whenever we were, talking over email, you reached out to me to say that you lived in Red Deer and that you had some interesting information about the song Middle Finger Response from How to Clean Everything. And I was like, one of the things that we always try to do on this show is really get the perspectives of people who live in Canada, because Keith and I aren't Canadian. And so much of the band, like the subtle nuance, like running underneath the band's like plot lines, so to speak, is being in Canada. And you started noticing some things about Middle Finger Response that resonated with your personal life. So I'm wondering if you can tell me what got you fascinated in this particular song and why you reached out to me about Middle Finger Response.
Yeah. It was a few years ago. I decided I was going to only listen to Propaganda in my car for my drive to and from work. So I
Good choice.
So I have my little CD booklet from the 90s style with as I said, just the CDs of Propaganda. And it had been a while since I had listened to How to Clean Everything. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to this for a while. And, after a few days of driving back and forth to work, when it came on, the first line of the song, I noticed him say, bowl of cherries at Waskasu. And I thought, that's funny. It kind of sounds like Waskasu.
Yeah.
And then I heard Sylvan Way of Life. And I thought, Sylvan Lake, that's not too far from here. And then when he got to the Parkland Mall, that's when it clicked. I went, wait a minute. That's three things that I know of in the first 10 seconds of this song that it never had registered before, but all of a sudden it all just fell into place. I said, this song's about Red Deer. At least the beginning part is.
Yeah.
And
well, something that you did that was really interesting is you sort of the other day went on a driving tour of the locations within the song. So what I'd like to do is go through each of the locations and have you tell me a little bit about them, what you know, and also a little bit about your experiences at those places. And so we might as well just go in order. So let's start with Waskasu Creek. Tell me about what you know about Waskasu Creek and what your time was like when you were there.
Yeah, Waskasu is just it's a very small, shallow creek that it's an offshoot of the Red Deer River that starts just north of the downtown, and it kind of stretches through a good chunk of the downtown, heading west out of town. It actually runs out all the way to Penhold, as you probably have heard from Coach's Corner.
Yeah.
It's, as I said, it's a very shallow river, very nice though, in certain parts, very idyllic, very open green space around a lot of the park areas that it runs through. Rotary Park is one of them. And in a little research I was doing, I found out that in the 1970s that large portions of the creek had to be straightened to alleviate flooding that was happening. That's one thing that Red Deer does get is flooding. When it rains hard, the way that the downtown where the river runs through, it's in the middle of a river valley. So when the water rises, it rises fast. And so I guess that really helped with keeping that down by straightening out a lot of the weaving of the creek.
Nice. So what about Sylvan way of life? What does this mean? I've never heard of this place, but you went there and you sent me some pictures and it looks pretty nice. So tell me about it.
Yeah. Sylvan Lake is, it's basically a tourist attraction, beach community. Alberta doesn't have a whole ton of beaches, being landlocked. But Sylvan Lake is, I would say, probably the biggest beach community in Alberta. It's about 16 miles west of Red Deer. Most of the main beachfront location is very touristy. You got your restaurants and bars and water-based businesses like swimsuits and water skis and that kind of stuff. It's a relatively small population, 15,000, but their average summer tourism is around 1 million people per year.
Oh wow, okay.
So it's definitely a booming spot in the summertime.
Nice.
And it's a lot of people that want to spend their time, by the water, in nature. There's a lot of golf courses, nature trails, that kind of thing around it. And it's a very nice little town. To me, it has a very retirement kind of community feel, where it's kind of laid back, especially in the wintertime when it's very slow and the tourists aren't crawling around like an anthill. And I actually learned that it is large enough to qualify for city status, and it has now for I think it's been like 8 to 10 years, something like that. And they, for some reason, haven't chosen to take in that. And I can only speculate, but I think it probably has to do with regulations and more responsibility that comes with being a city. So they probably like their little town sort of feel and not have to worry about the city problems.
Gotcha. How far away is Sylvan Lake from like the center of Red Deer?
Give or take, 20 miles.
Okay, cool.
It would be 16 from the outskirts to the outskirts of Sylvan. So, I mean, you're looking at about a 20-minute drive.
Sweet. Okay. So let's go to Parkland. This was a really interesting location last time when we talked, and I'm curious to hear about this as well. So can you tell me a little bit about Parkland Mall? Because it's changed a lot throughout the years. Like Chris wrote this song in the early 90s, like who knows, maybe even the late 80s. I'm not entirely sure when he wrote it. But the mall itself, like you were telling me, has undergone many shifts. And I'm curious if you can just kind of describe that and what the mall is like maybe then and now.
Yeah. Doing my research again for the show, I learned actually quite a bit. It was originally opened November 3rd of 1970. It was Red Deer's first indoor mall, and it cost $4.5 million to build. And I mean, for that time, that seems quite hefty or quite steep. Interesting laws that were happening here in the province at that time, which I was totally unaware of. And the building of the mall actually helped to change the municipal retail regulations, basically allowing stores to maintain later hours on all weekdays. Because at that time, I believe all stores had to be closed. I think it was by 5 o'clock Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. They could only stay open, I believe it was 1 day a week where they could maintain the later hours. And I think it was a Wednesday. And so basically they pushed back against that and ended up winning. And excuse me. So that, as I said, that it basically helped to change and help out the other businesses and allowing them to stay open to whenever they felt they could run their business.
Nice.
And so by 1978, the mall had doubled from the original size. So when I first moved here, it was known as Parkland Mall. There were two malls here in Red Deer, the Parkland Mall and the Bauer Mall. At the time, when I first got here, they both seemed to be doing, very well. A lot of business in both. But as the time has gone forward, there's been a definite shift in one mall over the other. I hate to repeat myself, but it's such a perfect analogy. In Kevin Smith's movie Mallrats, there is your good mall, and then there's your dirt mall.
Mm-hmm.
Parkland Mall has become the dirt mall.
Gotcha.
Basically, if it wasn't for Walmart, I don't know if they would still be open. And one of the other in the early 2000s when I got here, not too long after, I kind of remember this happening. Some new owners had taken over, and they want to rebrand and try to make it a new shopping experience. So they decided to call it the Red Deer Center Mall. And unfortunately, it's not in the center of Red Deer, so that confused a lot of people. And most of the people who've lived here, a long time, they just refuse to call it that. So by 2005, they changed it back to Parkland Mall, and to this day, it stands as the Parkland Mall. And the Bauer Mall, which is our, I guess its competitor. It's the much more, new and cutting edge mall that businesses are all still in every single kiosk, whereas the Parkland Mall, it's a little sad to kind of walk through there and see how many empty spaces are in there.
Can you tell me a little bit about the City Hall building? Because City Hall gets mentioned as well, and there's an interesting history behind this building that you were telling me about, and I'm curious if you can just tell the listeners about it as well.
City Hall is actually right in the middle of downtown, so that would have made more sense to call that center Red Deer Center.
Mm-hmm.
So it was built in 1963, and the city had it designed by an architectural firm from Ontario called Secord and Herzog, who were actually known for their, artistic architectural designs.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to go with, not what the norm was at the time. The city decided that they wanted to redesign it in 1980, and they wanted to add 2 extra floors. Well, during the redesigning of the building, they decided that, we don't want these angular corners anymore. We would rather it just be, a solid block.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
It's just a big white block. But it is surrounded by a very large botanical garden, which they do. I give them credit for that. They do very good upkeep on that. And in the wintertime, throughout the Christmas season, they set up lights through the whole thing. It's very nice for, for tourists and for, families to come downtown to, have something nice for them to go spend a little bit of time if you got to be downtown.
Yeah. Well, so Lyndon, this is really interesting because what you've sort of done is given us a tour of the locations that are found only within the first couple of sentences in this song. And then he goes from there, and they call this piece Not How It Seems to Be, Sugar-Coated Disease. So it really switches gears almost immediately from a description of, this totally normal town and suburban life and lake life in the summertime and stuff like that. And then it totally just critiques that right away. And I'm wondering if you can tell me your take on the song as a whole, because there's so much that Chris does after the first couple of sentences that we've just sort of picked apart. What is your take on the rest of the song?
Well, I was actually listening to it again today, just to sort of refamiliarize myself, to just, kind of get a feel. And I think we talked about this a little bit before, was Red Deer and the town very 5 minutes away called Springbrook.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ex-military base, and Red Deer itself has a military base in town here. It's more of for the recruits. I think that during, Chris's time in Alberta, I have a feeling that he was probably around that. And I think that, the more he looked at, oh man, Red Deer was, on the outside, it looks real nice. But on the inside, if you look closer, you realize that they're manufacturing soldiers here. And, there's a lot of things about Red Deer that I'm sure Chris hates. One of those things I'm sure has to do with, there's a lot of, pro-military stance, a lot of flag waivers. The more I thought about it, it was like, it is this sort of like on the outside, everything looks pretty idyllic here. It's a real nice place. But, if you start, scratching at the surface a little bit, you start realizing like, there are some things about this place that maybe if you learn a little more.
Well, Lyndon, I am just so grateful to you and just so tickled that you were willing to come back and do this and have a good time with me on the show and talk about Red Deer and some of these sites that are so discussed in this song. Thank you so much for being here. It's just such a pleasure to have you. Absolutely, man. I did want to just give a quick shout out to you guys. You and Keith do an amazing job. I want to thank you guys for that. Hey, if you ever do make it to Red Deer, stop into Hemp and Stuff. That's my job. I run the largest head shop in Alberta. So if Keith ever make it through to Alberta, try and come and see me. Say that name one more time for everybody out there. It's Hemp and Stuff. Nice. All one word. Are you on socials with that? Yeah. With your business? Tell everybody where to find you. So it's at Hemp on Instagram. It's at Hemp and Stuff. Is it all hemp, one word? Hemp N, just HEMPN? Yeah. Stuff with one F. Excellent. So my Instagram is at Dragon, but spelled DRAAGYN 13. And look me up. I said, if you want to see my little doodles. Awesome. Well, Lyndon, it's such a thrill to have you on the show. We love having fans on, and especially that you were just so willing to do something special for us, like go and be a tourist in your own area and think about them from within the context of the song. It's real thrilling, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Hey, anytime, man. Appreciate you. Awesome. So thank you so much, Lyndon, for jumping on the phone with me to talk about all these spots in Red Deer. I hopefully that was, a vivid discussion for everybody around the world who listens, who has never been to Canada or North America. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that was a nice little addition for all of you out there to hear about these specific places. And you can see those photos that Lyndon took on our Instagram and our Twitter at Propagandipod at both of those. So go check those out. So Keith, let's go into the next line, okay? Yeah, it says, your members of parliament lining their garments with hides of the masses, their heads stuck up their asses, bald little soldiers, flags sewn to shoulders. This insight spawns despair. Any thoughts about that? Okay, yeah, I'll go first. Okay, so, cool. It's this realization that, so this despair, right? The despair to me is crucial here. And it's this realization that those we elect to powerful positions aren't actually there for making our society a legitimately better place. And that is a very, very hard thing to wrap your brain around and accept, especially when you grow up in the American education system, where we laud our systems from a very young age and talk about how special we are. And you know this as well, because you're a teacher and I'm a teacher, and we both have vivid memories of these types of experiences in our life.
either as students when we were kids or as teachers, and seeing what we are sort of expected to cover.
Right.
And so like I bet behind closed doors that Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer are like legitimately friends. Like they've worked together for years and years and years. And like, I can just picture those two guys like in an office somewhere in the US Capitol, just yucking it up while going on television and, ripping into each other and saying how horrible each other are. And like on paper, this sounds good, right? Like elected officials who spar in public and then behind closed doors do good work together. Except like the words of Mitch McConnell and his actions would happily turn the U.S. into like a Christo-fascist state where voting access is removed piece by piece. Women's rights are removed piece by piece, all while these folks we do elect do very little, it seems, to except prepare for the next election and raise money to stay in office so they can keep making $180,000 a year, while also somehow becoming millionaires.
Yeah.
Like Greg Gianforte from Montana is worth $189 million. Like Mark Warner, like the Democratic senator from Virginia, is worth $90 million. Vern Buchanan, a rep from Florida, is worth $74 million, and he bought $1 million yacht the same day he voted for the Republican tax cuts in 2017. Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut is worth $70 million. Dianne Feinstein's worth like $60 million. Trey Hollingsworth, I think, who is in your state, is worth $50 million. Rick Scott from Florida is worth $260 million. Pelosi is worth $114 million. And then between 2004 and 2020, Mitch McConnell's net worth rose from $3 million to $34 million. Like Roy Blunt from Missouri, his net worth a decade ago was $600,000, and now he's worth $10 million. So in 10 years, Roy Blunt from my home state of Missouri, his net worth rose like $9.5 million. Like, remember that guy like Daryl Issa from California? He's not in office right now, but that dude is worth $360 million. Like, these people know how to get money. That is for sure. So I don't really hold out much hope that they are really interested in any of us, and that they all have extremely narrow views for what they want to accomplish. And it doesn't really seem to be to me that their real priority is making our lives better. You know what I mean?
Right. And although this song is referencing, their legislative branch, Greg, take a guess. Who was the last U.S. president who wasn't a millionaire?
Jimmy Carter.
No.
I give up.
Harry S. Truman. That was the
wow.
last time we had a president who was not a millionaire. So, of course, I process, just like you did, these lyrics in the context of the United States, even though this song is deeply Canadian, as our interview spoke about. It's also universal, though, which makes me really sad to say that. This isn't just unique to Canada or the U.S. And take the ideas that you mentioned and look at COVID alone and the snapshot of governance in greed when healthcare, the middle class, schools, charities are stretched to the point of breaking by the medical and economic disaster. Well, how did politicians in the United States respond? So from February 2nd to April 8th of 2020, a nonpartisan watchdog group found that 12 senators made a combined 127 purchases or sales of their stock options, while 37 House representatives made at least 1,358. I saw something from Politico that says, quote, as lawmakers received closed-door briefings on the pandemic from top health and national security officials, some bought stock in remote work technology, telemedicine companies, pharmaceutical makers currently developing potential vaccines, car manufacturers that have shifted to making ventilators for coronavirus patients, and alcohol producers that started making hand sanitizer during the coronavirus outbreak. So a similar laundry list like you provided. Here's just some details related to stock regarding members of Congress. Senator David Peru dumped between 1 million and 5 million worth of stock in a company where he was formerly a board member. And after the markets crashed, he bought it back and earned a windfall after its price skyrocketed.
Gross.
Senator Kelly Loeffler, whose husband is the CEO and chairman of the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange, sold millions after being briefed by the White House. And one of her two purchases, or just two purchases afterwards, was stock worth between 100 to 250,000 in a technology company that offers teleworking software. Obviously, like the expanse of things like Zoom, as more and more people were working at home. Senator Rand Paul waited a year to disclose that his wife, Kelly Paul, purchased between 1,000 and 15,000 worth of stock in Gilead, which makes the antiviral drug remdesivir. Senator Dianne Feinstein's husband, Richard Bloom, sold shares of a biotech company on January 31st that were valued between 500,000 and 1 million. The Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman, Richard Burr of North Carolina, along with his wife, sold 600,000 and between 600,000 and 1.7 million in more than 30 transactions in late January and mid-February. So just before the markets began to dive and government health officials began to sound alarms about the virus, and Burr was captured in a recording privately warning a group of influential constituents in early 2020 to prepare for economic disaster. After the Senate was briefed on the coronavirus on January 24th, Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma sold between $180,000 and $400,000 in stocks just 3 days after the briefing. And he ultimately sold $500,000 in stocks, his entire holdings in PayPal and other management, Brookfield Asset Management, and in Apple.
Oh, wow.
But what's crazy and hard for me to make sense of is that we're led instead to find fault with the already struggling families who receive, just a little bit of assistance from the government after being pummeled by economic collapse and shuttered businesses, diminished hours and layoffs. That they're the people that are at fault with society, the people who just get a couple crumbs as they're struggling. So extrapolate this detail, right? This little snippet over all of U.S. history amidst wars, settler expansion, resource extraction, corporate lobbying, ex-politicians worming their way on the corporate boards, or CEOs being appointed to secretary positions to regulate the industries that have made them wealthy. And you start to realize that like Teapot Dome isn't the exception. It's actually the rule itself.
Oh my gosh. Why are they're not really in it for people. It feels like it's like just this backroom way of finding out inside information and enriching oneself. Like, I feel like that is like the dirty secret here. And it just is so disturbing and sad. And, I don't know enough to really process my feelings on all that, but holy smokes, that is an overwhelming amount of information and real information about the people who are, quote unquote, in charge of this entire place, and seeing what they do for their personal agendas as opposed to, helping people in the world, because how much they must spend so much time worrying about those things, and all the moment they spend worrying about themselves is less time that they're actually worrying about the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that they represent. So that's really disturbing. You know what I mean?
And none of the governmental investigations into those people, I'm pretty sure none, actually found them culpable for any of their actions. That individuals could just say that they weren't present at the meeting from the White House. So therefore, because they weren't physically there, that didn't shape their decision in selling literally millions of dollars of stock in the week after. It's a tale of just multiple Americas that are broken and fragmented. And again, the people at the bottom are the individuals who are somehow responsible for the rot that you so aptly described.
Yeah. And I live here in Western New York, and there's a guy who was the representative of the district over, named Chris Collins. And people will remember that name because he was found guilty of like insider trading things. So every once in a while, someone will quote unquote go down for doing what so many of them seem to be doing. So they're like, oh, look, we do hold ourselves accountable because this one example is somebody who did go down, but Chris Collins is worth over $40 million, and his like sentences have been like reduced over and over and over, as far as I can tell. Like, he's paying very little price for it other than being out of office. So they're like, oh, look, we do hold ourselves accountable. Here's this one example. So anyway, let's move on from what we know is the disgrace of our, political systems at this point, and the sick joke that we continue to tell ourselves about how special we are. But we have this next line where Chris goes into the very notable rant. And no, I'm not going to say some of these words on the podcast. So Chris says, "Why am I not a part of this? Pine cone wealth and cedar fence bliss. All your novel themes that keep you amused on your way to the Canadian flag waving Aryan butt picking dream." I'll go with that one. So I love the first part of this line, Keith. Just asking yourself, why can't I just enjoy the blissful ignorance of everybody around me? Why do I want the world to be better for everyone and nobody else seems to? The apathy of the comfortable, you know what I mean? So like, I grew up in the imagery Chris describes, and I was blissfully into it for many, many years. I grew up in Fenton, Missouri, just outside of St. Louis. My parents had my childhood home built from the ground up as a brand new build. And we were the first owners and moved into a brand new house in 1984 that we lived in until 2002. Like, I watched those trees grow. You know what I mean? I sat in the creek behind the house. Our house backed up to woods. Like, my parents had a second home at Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri that we'd go to on the weekends from like 5th to like 9th grade. And I would drive a wave runner and I would swim off the dock. So I know very, very well what it feels like to have the cedar fence bliss, to not have to think about much. You know what I mean? And holy moly, I wonder how much life would have been different if I just never would have traveled during and after college. Like, if I hadn't seen things like when I moved to Mexico to teach at a school, and I went to the Walmart to get supplies for my house, and there was a literal tent city behind the Walmart in Mexico where I did my first year of teaching. So like, it's behind the Walmart, hundreds of people living in tarp tents in Mexico. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was very, very like wild for me to see a tent city next to a Walmart. I'll never forget it. And like, if I hadn't walked through like the Tenderloin in San Francisco through a throng of people outside a methadone clinic, you know what I mean? That's another vivid one. If I hadn't befriended Muslims and Sikhs who tell me about their experiences with racism, if I hadn't thought really hard about what this band was saying, and like each passing year now, the world seems to get worse, and all those booger flicking dreams Chris discusses get that veneer stripped right off. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. But like, I love the revised version of lyrics on the website, and I bet Chris wishes he could have a do-over on this part of the lyrics. Like,
right.
He often says things like, imagine having your teenage journal published for the entire world to hear nonstop. And I think the demo version says the male anatomy version. So there's the demo on the How to Clean Everything 20th anniversary reissue. And like, I think that it says the male anatomy version on the demo, but the recording is just a demo and it isn't really amazing. So I can't totally be sure what he's saying on the demo version, but I think it's the male version as opposed to the female version.
Greg, you brought up a lot of points that have me thinking and reflecting, long-term in terms of like my own childhood and upbringing and opportunities. But even back just to a few weeks ago with my interview with Chris Hanna, asking about how to process and navigate like the various news stories and like this overwhelming just flow and flood of information that doesn't really bring hope or positivity. And that Chris's response in terms of understanding that he's not on the business end, right? That he is in an opportunity to aid others if and when possible. I mean, that's just so easy to forget that
Mhm.
I can co-opt the stress, the anxiety, and the pain that other people are experiencing, whether it's, currently the essentially climate refugees who are homeless in parts of Louisiana, or the women who are, subject to laws that regulate their bodies. Like those things don't directly impact me, so I might work myself up, but the reality is that for the most part, like, my experience in my life and my opportunities put me clearly at the top 1% of the globe, right?
Mhm.
Easily. The comforts that I've had, that, my father was a upper management of a $1 billion steel company, and that, like, the opportunities and the travel and the food and the security, and, from college to even now, if I need help with something, that they are there in ways that, like, other people simply don't have. Or you mentioned some of your travel to Mexico and elsewhere,
Yeah.
that my host family currently, following the civil war in eastern Ukraine, lost their jobs. That part of the Ukraine is essentially cut off from the rest of the country because of Ukrainian nationalists and Russian insurgents who have fought for the last 8 years in that region, or having the opportunity to do some really fun and meaningful work with organizations and groups living in Nicaragua, and showing up for 2 weeks, and like, seeing things and helping people out, but also realizing I'm still just a tourist,
Yeah. You're going to
right?
leave.
Right, because I'm not going to be there. And from the social and political unrest that has plagued Nicaragua for the last several years, on top of the impact of the coronavirus, on top of hurricanes that have, decimated the eastern part of the country, I'm not there, and I can see those things in the news, and then I could just, have a beer before bed, and, watch a movie if I want, and those things don't directly impact me. So there's like
Yeah.
this tendency to, and I do this, and I've talked about it in the last probably 3 or 4 episodes, that the stress that and anxiety that is brought out about things that just feel so overwhelming, and it's easy to lose perspective in terms of where I am and how good I have it. So with that said, Greg, unlike most Americans, I believe the American dream, so not the Canadian dream that's referenced in the song, but the American dream is just a lie.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, a group of Harvard economists published a study on actual and perceived economic mobility, comparing perceptions in the US and Europe. And Americans are just straight up in denial.
Yeah.
The data show that Americans believe the chance that a person who is born into the bottom 20% of households in income in the United States can reach the top 20% in adulthood. And that's 50% higher than in reality. 54% of Americans believe everyone has a chance to make it. 52% believe the economic system is fair. 48% believe that effort is the main reason people are poor. And the researchers also discovered that within the US, an overly optimistic outlook about economic mobility is concentrated in the parts of the country where actual mobility is the lowest.
Oh, wow.
Like the Southeast is the area of the US with the lowest economic mobility and the highest inequality. Yet the average Southeasterner believes that the chance of someone born into the bottom 20% reaching the top are almost double what they actually are.
Delusion.
Yeah. And so not only do I think of the prototypical American dream as unattainable, like it's a lie, but I also don't believe that American dream, if it were real and attainable, will actually provide meaning and security and identity amidst our stratified pandemics of microbes, mass shootings, opioids, wildfires, flash floods, right-wing terrorism, mental health crises, healthcare costs. And yet, even though I don't believe that like a home and the picket fence will help things, I still somehow think I'm behind in life for being 37 and never owning a house. Like that's how ingrained these milestones are into our culture and into our psyche, that I was late having a child.
Yeah.
I'm behind in how much I have saved for a house, for my son's college fund and my own retirement. There's this never ending mental treadmill of comparisons, what ifs, doubts, and concerns about the past. How many days until the next paycheck, and what would seem like a pretty bleak future if it weren't for my dad, as I mentioned, and my in-laws' ability to help out me and my wife with essentially no strings attached financial support. So like, I'd like a house to be able to stop giving rent to a landlord. I don't think having a house is going to provide me with a sense of accomplishment. Maybe just a place to establish a footing in my community, have some privacy, be able to walk outside of where I live and not be in a parking lot, have land to cultivate and to learn about and grow native plants and vegetables, to spend time with my wife and my son. But the pandemic has me so spooked about how precarious and tenuous our society actually is. I mean, I just get mental flashbacks to like Cormac McCarthy's The Road. A house won't really mean something for very long in those sort of conditions. So I get you hear this kind of like punk and hardcore railing against the 9 to 5, the picket fences, the house, those sort of things, which I totally get. But at the same time, like the older I get, I also realize that, I mean, we have to survive and we kind of have to have money saved away. And maybe when my responsibilities and obligations in my early 20s were essentially non-existent, and I could just kind of do whatever, or if it's a person in a position in life in which they're in a punk house or they're staying with others or whatever, like long term, that I think the way that society is set up is just like untenable. And I don't see propaganda like that sort of like anti-picket fence house sort of thing now.
Right.
Not that they don't have criticisms of like the myths and the false promises that people in quote unquote civilized world are force fed, but there also seems to be like this understanding of an acceptance of that within either family life of band members or within their own comforts or their own opportunities that Chris even mentions in Zoocosis, right? His own minimum security prison. So that like those are itself in a way, if problematic, still privileges that far too many people don't have access to.
Yeah, and you were thinking about like being behind on buying a house and stuff. And I have owned houses before. And the last house I owned, we had to have over $12,000 of sunk costs having dead trees taken out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? We got an estimate for $9,000 to replace the roof.
Right.
And like, so you talk about owning stuff and then you do own it and you feel really great about it. And all of a sudden you're like, wow. Yeah. So that was a $6,000 HVAC expense. That was a $15,000, tree tearing down expense. That was a $9,000 roofing job. Holy smokes. I need $17,000 worth of windows. And it's like, okay, all of a sudden my $150,000 house is a heck of a lot more than that. Yeah, and so it's honestly pretty wild when you think about all that, but I hear you. And so, then we have this next line. Nobody cares about the state of affairs. You can turn blue in the face, but you cannot erase. Oblivious to the obvious and making perfect sense, but I'm not giving through. Progress overdue. So first of all, that is a heck of a well-phrased string of lyrics there that Chris delivers in that rapid fire succession that we were talking about earlier. And that is some skillful stuff right there. Excellent phrasing. But like the lyric actually makes me think of all the times leading up to elections when I was doing my best to advocate for positions online and in person to friends and acquaintances. And I have vivid memories of some of my childhood friends who used to be like into punk and music with me say things like, well, you're just really obsessed with this, aren't you? And then not even try to process a lot of the things I was trying to say because it was just easier not to. And I think the line can come across as a bit arrogant and young about how much sense he's making. Like he says earlier in that interview that we quoted from, he's like, these things were a little bit out over our skis for like a 20-year-old who doesn't have a ton of life experience behind them saying these things. But like, I get what he's saying because many times I've done my best to persuade people to reconsider a position and it didn't move the needle at all. And it's just one of those things, like not persuading somebody who isn't interested in hearing how to make others' lives better when their life is already pretty gosh darn awesome. So it's one of those things like, hey, we can make life better for everybody. And then the person you're trying to persuade is like, well, my life is actually really great. And this is a lot of work and I'm super tired. So see you later. You know what I mean?
Right, Greg. I think the outright apathy is harder for me to make sense of than, say, the blissful ignorance. And getting a bit more involved with issues when I was in college and after, the issues I learned about in my coursework or revelations that I made while volunteering, I remember sharing things with others, trying to maybe also light that spark for some other people. And they just responded by flat out telling me they didn't care. And granted, most things that I say that I do care about on the show or elsewhere, to the point of staying up late at night with a stomach ache, or, I walk with my son where like my mind is just a flickering Rolodex of headlines and reactions to headlines and reactions to reactions of headlines.
Yeah.
I spend mental energy, not physical energy on those things. But I still can't imagine how anyone could look around the US or Canada or any other part of the developed world, whatever that means, and go, well, we reached it. Like, this is the height of human potential. Like, how can anyone look around and not see just the countless ways we are failing most people and the future? And for America, again, I think of something that Shirley Chisholm said. She said, I don't measure America by its achievement, but by its potential, that this progress is far overdue.
Yeah. So next we have a line that really jars me, Keith. And like, I'm wondering if you can help me wrap my brain around this. So he says, but don't expect to find me with a note left to be read, pistol in my hand and a bullet in my head. And this is like really dark. And like I read stuff like this and like I wonder if Chris's parents ever genuinely worried about him and his welfare. Like, oh my gosh, like I almost expect to find him dead someday because he's such a dark person. You know what I mean? Like I was like, I wonder how his parents feel about this stuff. Like, this is the first time I really ever thought about how Chris's mom and dad felt about his songwriting.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, this is a legitimately scary lyric to me. Maybe the scariest lyric in the entire Propaganda discography, even more so than the ending of Zookosis about seeing what he has planned.
Right.
Because this one is basically saying to me, like, when I realized nobody else cared, I realized I might as well just kill myself to save myself from talking to people for the rest of my life who aren't interested in growth or learning or doing things that benefit other people. And I'm wondering what your take on this one is.
Yeah, that's interesting, Greg, because I read it very differently. And I think I interpret this almost in the opposite way. And I hear Chris as saying, you don't have to worry about me taking my own life, leaving a note before shooting myself. And that although he often will sound bleak or hopeless, if it's in his music or in his conversation daily with people, that probably it seems like he's acknowledging, as you said, that others might be worried about him. That I connect this to the next part where he says he still has a job to do, which is to piss people off and expose them to ideas that they don't want to hear about, like the next line reads.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think I probably actually agree with you on that take. Like, So like, I won't just off myself and get out of the way. I won't shut up. I need to keep doing this work and helping to make the world a better place. Okay. I like your framing way more.
Sure.
And I'm officially going to convert my view to that one, because obviously Chris is alive and well and has been doing this work for many years. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my impression of this. But let's get into that next line. Because this census indicates and this atlas has related 3 billion humans, I haven't irritated, and I've got a lot of work to do. 3 billion people, 3 billion snotty fuck yous. And this is a line I imagine Chris would never write now. He probably looks back on this. He's probably like, oh my gosh. Like when he looks back on these lyrics from a lot of this record, he talks about how some of it being like cringy, and his focus on life now seems to be to listen a lot more. Like he's talked about in interviews, like that great interview he did with Q on CBC with Tom Power.
Super good.
Which is produced by our friend of the podcast, Mitch Pollack.
Right.
Hi, Mitch.
Yeah.
So that said, I looked at the census data, and the world currently has a population of 7.9 billion, which is, I don't know, that's freaky, man. And it's a mere 19 years after Chris wrote these lyrics. Now, the population of the Earth in 1992 was 5.4 billion, not 3 billion. So Chris is completely wrong about the census data. But Conrad Sichler, who we had on our Leg Hold Trap episode, talks about this in the Leg Hold Trap interview, where he was recording the demo version that appears on How to Clean Everything's reissue. So Conrad talked about this in the interview on Leg Hold Trap, about how the number of people on the planet in 92 was 5.4, not 3 billion. So if you missed the story behind that clip of Conrad recording Propaganda's demos and that demo version of Middle Finger Response, go back and check out our huge conversation with Conrad on the Leg Hold Trap episode. Because Conrad recorded the demo that's on the How to Clean Everything 20th anniversary. He was in Toothpick Hercules with John K. Sampson, and he explains who is and is not allowed to call him by the nickname Chris calls him at the end of the demo version, where he says, except for Conrad Sichler.
That's 3 billion snotty fuck yous. Fuck you. Fuck all of you. Except for Conrad Sichler.
I'd like to thank Propaganda and Chris Hanna, and Liz, if you're listening, and the condom industry. I'd like to thank John Sampson.
And then he goes on to sing more lines after that. So I love how Conrad was very hurt by one of his best friends basically telling the whole world to take a hike. So Chris made a lovely exception while in the studio, probably looking at Conrad through the glass and singing to him lovingly. Through the glass in the control room to give Conrad a pass on his scorn for all of humanity. And hilariously, Chris Hanna says at the end of the song, after the demo version, the condom industry would like to thank John Sampson. So I thought that was really goofy, hilarious. But I think that's Conrad saying, I'd like to thank Propaganda and Chris Hanna on the recording after Chris saves Conrad from his condemnation. So the demo version for How to Clean Everything has an awesome alternative version of this song that Conrad and I talked about back on that Leg Hold Trap episode, which I think was episode 53, if my memory serves me right.
Well, Greg, I agree with you that I don't think Chris would write this now. And though, I mean, if I think of it in the terms of a youthful, angry, like, you know, sonic middle finger to the masses, to, you know, mainstream music and culture, and even to mainstream punk at the time. I like this lyric and I think it's kind of funny. But I also think that Chris would probably shift what he says his work has to be, as he
Mhm.
mentions in that interview from Radio Q, as he talked about with his interview with me about being a member of a community, helping out organizations that are doing on the ground, sustainable work. That he the work part has shifted in how he sees his own role in the communities around him. So that's like maybe a connection I'm making now that I hadn't really considered, that, why are we here? And, in those various places that he's offered those descriptions of how he tries to make sense and find meaning of things, which I think, we can all maybe scrape a little bit of a nugget or of either not inspiration, that sounds too corny, but to find then our own ways that make us feel, fulfilled, that are also productive and meaningful and helping those around us.
Yeah. So, this is a really interesting song. And I was looking online and I did find some covers.
Right.
And
there are quite a few.
Yeah, there's some real good ones. There's a good one by a songwriter who goes by the name Dal Failure, and that was so good. He made a video for it and everything. And another band called the Anti-Lam Front did an acoustic version with a one of those like beatbox hand drum kind of things as well. And so they were totally cool with me putting the whole entire song in. So here is another cover of Middle Finger Response by Anti-Lam Front, and enjoy that. And then we'll bring this episode back for a landing.
Oh, Sherry, it was like a creek, a sylvan real life for those who speak. Nygaard Parkland Mall, your landscape oasis now famed City Hall. And they call this peace. Not how it seems to me. Sugar-coated it seems. Buckle at the knees. Your members of parliament hiding their collar with hides up their masses and stuck up their asses. Bald little soldiers, black sewn to their shoulders. These insides boxed in despair. Why am I not part of this? Pinecone wealth and seabed's bliss are your novel themes that keep you amused on your way to the Canadian flag-waving area. Motherfucking cock-sucking dream. Oh. Nobody cares about the state of affairs. You can't put it in the face, but you cannot erase. Oblivious to the obvious. I'm making perfect sense, but I'm not getting through. War is overdue, but don't expect to find me with a no left to be read. Pistol in my hand and bullet in my head. This census syndicates and this atlas has related 3 billion humans I haven't irritated. I got a lot of work to do. 3 billion people. That's 3 billion snotty fuck yous. Fuck you. Fuck all of you.
Okay, so thank you to Anti-Lam Front for allowing me to put that cover in. Keith, I was looking through YouTube and I didn't really find any good comments on this song. So this is like our first episode where we don't really have a whole lot of things to say about YouTube commentary. So sorry about that, everybody. But Keith, you want to bring us in for a landing here and tell me what you're walking away from the song thinking about?
Sure. Again, reflecting on the conversation with Chris, some of our other conversations recently, I think because this song doesn't have a singular topic or issue that it addresses, there are a few different threads that are connected together. I'm kind of thinking back to a few other things, and I like to keep notebooks of quotes and ideas that I come across. And cleaning through some things in the last 2 weeks, I discovered that I jotted down a passage from a speech from the activist and environmentalist and author Edward Abbey. People might be familiar with his book, The Monkey Wrench Gang. And I want to read this quote here because I think it connects with some of these ideas and perhaps some things that I wanted to say in recent episodes, but didn't. So Edward Abbey says, quote, "Do not burn yourselves out. Be as I am, a reluctant enthusiast, a part-time crusader, a half-hearted fanatic. Save the other half of yourselves and your lives for pleasure and adventure. It is not enough to fight for the land. It is even more important to enjoy it while you can, while it's still here.
Oh.
So get out there and hunt and fish and mess around with your friends. Ramble out yonder and explore the forests, climb the mountains, bag the peaks, run the rivers, breathe deep of that yet sweet and lucid air, sit quietly for a while and contemplate the precious stillness and the lovely, mysterious, and awesome space. Enjoy yourselves. Keep your brain in your head and your head firmly attached to the body active and alive. And I promise you this much. I promise you this one sweet victory over our enemies, over those desk-bound men and women with their hearts in a safe deposit box and their eyes hypnotized by desk calculators. I promise you this, you will outlive the bastards."
I love that. So I am fairly desk bound as a person, but I think that anybody who follows us on social media knows that I am an absolutely obsessive cyclist, beach goer, runner. I hike a lot. So the things that afford me the comfortable life that I live are very desk bound, like Abby mentions in the speech. But I am absolutely as committed as ever to being outside and soaking in those moments of joy. So I'm actually doing a lot of what Abby says there. And, as much as I'm like aware of the rot that I talked about of society, I'm here one time on this planet, and I can't spend all of it crippled by despair. I can't spend it in a total state of paralysis. So I'm going to keep riding my bike, and I'm going to keep, thinking about stuff, and I'm going to keep raising my kiddo. And yeah, I love that. So those are some awesome closing lines. And so I think that we should rate this because it's really going to offend a lot of people. And I'll start. I'm going to give it a 1.75 ish.
Okay.
Here's why. Love the ideas found within the song. Obviously, it made me think a lot.
Yeah.
The music isn't really all that interesting to me. And that's a huge part of it for me. Like, I want to have the arm hair standing up feeling.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, if I blast this in my car and sing along to it, like, it doesn't like move me like music tends to do when something insane happens. You know what I mean? So I'm going to give this a 1.77 out of 5. And so like I said, like whenever I compare these, whenever I rank these songs, I only compare them to all other Propaganda songs, to no other band. And so I like the song, obviously. And yeah, that's what I'm going with.
I should just close out the episode and say thank you for listening to Unscripted Moments, so I don't have to give my own rating.
Yeah.
So feel free to turn it off now, people. But I look back and I saw that I gave Head, Chest, or Foot a 1.75, and I like that track more than Middle Finger Response. And I realize now that I don't feel like that score was accurate. So I don't know, continuity is important, but also this is really the part of the episode that I spent the least amount of mental gas on.
Me too.
So at the risk of getting angry emails, that Greg will just end up reading anyway.
Yep. And I just made up my ranking on the fly. I didn't even write that down. Like I made it up.
I'm going to hold my nose and give this a 1.5.
All right. Well, we have so many thanks to do for this episode. Thank you to Lyndon Nygaard for reaching out to talk about red deer and for driving all over red deer to take photos of us. So he was doing that like half a day. Like it was a crazy amount of extra effort just to get a couple of pictures. So thank you so much, Lyndon. And thank you so much to Andy Treister. Everybody go follow Andy on Instagram at Andy in the Basement. He's posting tons of music there all of the time. And his jazz playthrough video of Middle Finger Response is going to be on our social media and his. So definitely watch Andy's playthrough. And, I'm really glad that we can hang out today, Keith, and talk about this song, Middle Finger Response. And if anybody wants to follow us on social media, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at propagandipod, and you can email us at propagandipod@gmail.com. And, I thought to take us out, we could play that whole entire performance of Propagandy's 2012 performance of this song at Red River Rampage.
Yeah.
After which, at the end of it, Chris literally rides a bike off of the stage with a little child carrier on the back. So at the end of the song, Chris thanks everybody and says, "Beeve, see you next week." And then he gets on his bike and he rides off of the stage to stage left. So here's Propagandy playing Middle Finger Response in 2012 at Red River Rampage. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
There's a little song that hasn't been played here for many fucking a year. Probably for good reason, but let's give it a go. And thanks for coming. See ya.